Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with my cafe unit tier list for Total War Warhammer Free Immortal Empires. They've got a great selection of units. Cafe has issues in terms of certain campaign mechanics, questions of replenishment, that kind of stuff. But their unit roster is actually pretty strong all around. So be it infantry, artillery, flying artillery options, monstrous units, is all very solid for the most part when we're talking about Cafe. So they do have quite a few good things on offer. But they also have a bunch of stuff that's either redundant or pretty useless. And we're going to start with the useless stuff. So we have peasants, all free peasant versions. So peasant long spears and peasant cavalry, just flat out useless units that are never worth recruiting in a Cafe campaign. Now, I can understand to some extent the logic of certain players who are like, well, there is a value in getting a very cheap spear infantry unit early on in your campaign. The thing is, because of Cafe's campaign mechanics at the moment, you don't really care so much about your economic potential. You may care about recruitment costs, but your upkeep is so low for so many different units that just recruiting a cheaper unit that is not as good as the alternative, unless you're dealing with anti-large, and even then you have options from that perspective, is not worth it. Peasant horseman, different situation there, but still a pretty useless unit. Is a fast-moving cav unit, is available very early on to recruit, but the entire building chain these guys come from is very questionable to recruit in the first place, especially early on. Because Cafe is about having to manage harmony, it is about getting multiple buildings for the same effect, and you do have other priorities in terms of the building slots that you have. Not just economic priorities, but also military recruitment priorities, hero recruitment priorities, artillery range, and so on. So peasant horsemen, completely useless. Peasant archers are the only peasant unit that are actually worth recruiting, and the sole reason behind that is that early on in a campaign, especially if you're playing on bow, but early on in a campaign, very, very early on, you will not have ranged options. And if you're expanding your territory, you won't have easily accessible ranged options if you're getting a bunch of tier 1 settlements. So these guys are useful from the perspective, not that they're good in combat, they are not, but rather their availability makes them at least somewhat useful in certain situations. Then we gotta talk about Jade Warriors. Jade Warriors with halberds, Jade Warrior crossbowmen, and with shields, and then Jade Lancers. So, here's my perspective. Jade Warriors, regular Jade Warriors, are an A-tier unit. I wouldn't go so far as qualify them as an S-tier unit. The reasoning behind that is, while they're really solid line holders, and they're a very early and cheap unit for which you get a bunch of enormous upgrades very quickly, upkeep benefits, military benefits, so that makes them useful. Their actual damage capability is quite lacking. They'll hold the line in the same way like Dwarf Warriors or Chaos Dwarf Warriors will hold the line. They might not be as heavily armored, but just the sheer insanity of their leadership, their availability makes them really strong. And also, you can make entire stacks of these. In fact, with Cafe, think of, let me put it from a perspective. If you're playing a Cafe campaign, because of the harmony system, the upkeep benefit it provides, you can get more armies of Jade Warriors than Skaven AI can get armies of Skaven slaves, let alone clan rats. Chew on that for a moment. Just how ridiculous Cafe is from that perspective. The reason I'm not putting them in S tier is because you have better options. And once you can get those better options, you don't necessarily have the same reasons to recruit them. But early on, where a meat of the campaign is taking place, certainly an A-tier unit. Then Jade Warrior Halberdiers. So they're losing the shield, but they gain a lot of that damage that they lack. And they're still a very durable frontline unit. And while you do have some range enemies to deal with in a campaign, you also have a lot of range power in your own. Like a lot of the real power that Cafe has in an army comes actually from their range capability that, by the way, you can recruit earlier than Jade Warriors with halberds. Halberds are an amazing line holder. think of Chaos Warriors with halberds, and that's what you're getting here. But then you also consider how cheap these guys are. So, half the cost of Chaos Warriors with roughly the same kind of combat capability. That is fucking amazing. Like, there's no argument. Like, I'm usually skeptical of units without a shield that are heavy infantry, unless it's a really, really good unit. So think of Chaos Warriors with halberds or gray weapons or Chosen. These are not Chosen. That comes later. But anyway, still a really good unit. Then we have Jade Warrior Crossbowmen and Jade Warrior Crossbowmen with shields. Obviously, the shielded version is an S tier unit, though it is an annoying thing to acquire, but really high amount of durability. That shield protects them from range units, good amount of damage. Jade Warrior Crossbowmen, A tier. Not that they're not worth recruiting, they absolutely are worth recruiting, but all the same, you just have a better version of the same unit available. Yeah, I do dislike that they made Jade Warriors and Jade Warrior Crossbowmen with shields and lack of shields, different tiers. That is annoying. I feel like all Jade Warriors should be available at the same tier, and you should have reasons to recruit them. Maybe, just cheaper cost for Jade Warrior Crossbowmen without shield, something like that. The reason you would get regular Jade Warriors versus Halberdiers is obviously that kind of shield, but given the way things are, yeah, this is where I'm standing. Then we have Celestial Dragon Guard and crossbows. So the crossbows, I would say they're an A tier unit, they're not an S tier unit. The problem I have with them is not their combat capability, it's certainly there, though it's not necessarily the most substantial ranged upgrade compared to, say, Jade Warrior Crossbowmen with shields. Also, if that's not enough, the tier requirement on these guys is pretty damn annoying. At most, I think like they should realistically be like a tier 3 unit. So these guys should be a tier 2 unit, these guys should be a tier 3 unit. But no, they're higher tier than that, they're annoying to recruit. And Cathay does have a decent amount of growth, but not the best growth in the game. So yeah, I think Creative Assembly needs to understand unit availability is important. I understand that these guys are supposed to be like the elite units, but they never feel a substantial enough upgrade to really make it like, oh, I really want these guys. You can say what you will about Sisters of Avalorn. They might be redundant in a high elf campaign because you have enough combat power, you might benefit from getting more armies, but no one can argue that Sisters aren't a great unit that is absolutely worth getting. But you compare these guys versus these guys, it's, just some annoyances on that level. But then we get the Dragon Guard, the melee version. One, it's available earlier, and it is a good unit to have in an army when you have Halberdiers. So the way I would see Dragon Guard, they are the ultimate line holders, not just in Cathay, but maybe flat out in the game. Like, they're better than Halberdiers. They're not as easily available, to be sure, and Halberdiers have their own benefits in combat, but both of them are in this tier unit. This one is better in combat, this one is far more available in a campaign, so that is how you should view it. But yeah, they work well together because these guys are shielded, these guys are not. That's the reason that you want to get them. Then we have Iron Hail Gunners and Grenadiers. Nangao Grenadiers, the ones that were recently added. Where do I stand on the subject of Iron Hail Gunners and Grenadiers? I think they're both B tier units. I am not going to say that they're bad units because they're not bad units. Let me just zoom out a bit there. I wouldn't say they're bad units, far from it, but from a combat perspective, they're a support range unit. So these guys, they're not blunderbusses. Like, they might have served the inspiration for blunderbusses. Their damage can be good, but they're also a very squishy unit that has limited range, so they can act quickly. The Grenadiers also have a similar problem to that. But they're a support unit. They're not a mainline damage unit. Jade Warrior Crossbowmen are a mainline damage unit. They're a support unit to disable enemies on a certain portion of the battlefield or harass enemies. These guys can do some mass fire or short range fire on a section of the battlefield, but you don't want to mass them. With regards to J-Lancers, this is the weird part. I like J-Lancers. I think they're a great cav unit. They're kind of like Reichsguard for Cathay, but they're pretty easy to recruit. The problem I have with them is the annoyance of having to recruit them. Like, if there was a Jade Warrior barracks that had all the Jade Warrior units, I would recruit them every single time in a campaign. I think they're worth it. And I would give a recommendation to people, if you're playing a Cathay campaign, the Warband upgrade system is such a fucking game changer from that perspective that I flat out recommend it. The Brown Jade Lancers, their combat capability is there, undeniably so. But at the same time, you don't really have a reason to go for the building. And you might argue, well, what about cav? What about skirmishing capability? What about a fast-moving unit to draw the enemy into a prepared line of fire? You have better options, right? Including your lords. Like, Cathayan legendary lords are dragons, of course. So that's already an inherent advantage. But with other armies, it's not so difficult to acquire a flying mount in a Cathayan campaign if you need that, if you want that with a lord. So I'm not so concerned in a Cathayan campaign about needing a unit to deal with enemy cav or to do flanking attacks. Can be useful sometimes, but you're the faction with range superiority. Your problems usually come more from a range perspective. And if you're looking at flankers that you have a reason to recruit, there's, again, better options available with that. So this is not a bad unit. If it was available for many other factions, like Silverhelms wish they were half the unit these guys were. Bretonia is envious that the Cathay has such a good cav unit available so quickly. But it's just kind of not needed for Cathay. Then we have Crane Gunners, also B-tier units. So these are like your Hong rifles or really your Giselle type unit. Though I'm going to say I think both Giselles and Long rifles generally perform better than Crane Gunners. Crane Gunners, they're trying to be discount Giselles. I don't think they quite manage it. But as far as a sniper gunpowder unit go, they do get the job done. But just like with Iron Handled Gunners and Grenadiers, you don't necessarily want too many of these. So just a couple of these to support an army. I usually find Giselles far more important and Long Rifles far more important in their respective campaigns than Crane Gunners. I've just found them underwhelming from a performance standpoint. Might have something to do with Lord scale lines, or the fact that Cathay really could use an engineer hero. That's a discussion in its own right, isn't it? On that subject. So yeah, Cathay does need at least an engineer hero to work with that. It would make perfect sense. Then we have the Cathayan land artillery. So we have cannons and Hellstorm rockets. So Cathay's rocket battery. I think Hellstorms are kind of better, but they're not as mobile as Cathay's artillery options. So a cannon is a cannon. A good, solid ranged unit to use in a battle. The rockets, the land-based rocket battery, pretty solid artillery unit dealing with clumps of enemies. Since you might be fighting quite a few enemies that bring masses of troops, they're pretty useful. Like, I wouldn't say they're an exception. Either of them are exceptional units, but they're always worth recruiting, of course, for very clear and obvious reasons in a Cathayan campaign. Then we have Onyx Croneman, completely useless garbage unit. Like, you can recruit these easy. They're cheap, to be sure, but their durability is so freaking weak in a campaign. Like, seriously, if I want these kind of units of like ranged skirmishers, right? Or range harassment units. Like, yes, Furies and Harpies can win aerial battles with other aerial units. That's something you shouldn't discount, but they're not durable enough. And do you need them? Keep in mind, you have fairly quick access to a bunch of really solid range units and artillery and magic. So the fundamental question in a Cathayan campaign, is this unit adding value to an army that has them? The answer, from my point of view, is going to be no. Like, I don't think there's really much value that Onyx Croneman provide to a Cathayan army. Even if you're dealing with like masses of Skaven ranged units, there's better choices in that respect. Even from a flying unit perspective, I'm not joking. Then we have long riders. So Pegasus Knights for Cathay. Pegasus Knights that are not royal Pegasus Knights, let alone Hippogriff Knights, and are an annoying tier to recruit them from an annoying building. I am firmly tempted to add them in D tier. In fact, I think I will. The reason I'm going to add them in D tier is because in F tier, it's not that they're horrible. It's not that they don't perform the role they're meant to, but they're very redundant, and there's almost no incentive whatsoever to recruit them in a campaign. Like, at least Jet Lancers, you can argue that it's easy enough to recruit them, so you might want to get a couple of them. Okay. By the time you can get Logma Riders, your campaign is over. Long over. Cathay does have that issue in particular. J Lancers you can at least reasonably acquire. You can't get these guys. So that's one of the major strikes against them. And as far as Cav or harassing units go in the air, say hello to the Moonbird and Celestial Lion. So both of these units, where would I rank them? Well, I think they're both really solid units. I think the Moonbird is a bit annoying to recruit, so I'm going to put that in C tier. The Lion, I would say, is B tier. It's worth it. It's a decent enough combat ability from that perspective. So, but view it from the perspective, as a support unit. The Moonbird, I would put the Moonbird at the same tier, but that tier requirement is hurting it a bit. Not because it's horrible, but both of these units are flying units, so if you're looking for that kind of flying melee capability, you have it with these two. So that's one of the reasons the Logma Riders are so useless, because you have these two units that are both easier to recruit, both of them, and generally better in battle. Unless you're picking a fight in terms of aerial duels. It's worth pointing out that usually you don't necessarily want air units to fight one another. It's kind of sketchy in Total War. You want range units to kill the enemy flying units, and then you want your own flying units to deal with enemy artillery or other portions. These guys are just better. And one of the reasons these kind of single entity flying units are better than multiple entities or multiple models in a unit has to do a lot with pathfinding. So, you send a hero or lord or single entity like this in the middle of an enemy artillery formation or an enemy range unit, you probably can get out. You're likely to lose some models along the way with Onyx Crowmen and Longbow Riders. That is one of the reasons I don't really care for them from their combat capability. Then we have the Drum and the Compass. Yeah, I'm going to say that these are C tier units. They're support units that you might get one. No, actually, I'm going to go with the Compass being D, even F, really. One, because you get the hero that can use it. So if you're looking for as a mount, so if you're looking for that capability, you got it. The Drum does offer some combat capability, some combat buffs that you can't get elsewhere. So there's some use in respect to that. Very, very limited. At least, however, it should be pointed out that it's easy enough to acquire the Drum. So that is one point in its favor. Then we have the Jade and Jet Lions in a campaign. I think both of these units are solid A tier. Not quite S tier from my point of view, but solid enough ground-based single entities. They both have their pros and cons, but you're generally going to benefit from recruiting both of them. In fact, the one thing you're required to do for the Legendary Hero of Cathay is to get both types. Or more or less, just recruit a bunch of them. So it is worth it getting these guys. Fairly easy to recruit. And one of the and they do help fill a gap in Cathay's roster, in that Cathay does lack a single entity damage dealing capability early on in their campaign. So these guys, they're pretty damn easy to recruit. You have a strong incentive to get the building they're coming from anyway. So I would firmly recommend going for them. Then we have the balloons. Right, so the light balloon, as I would say, is an F tier unit. Like, there is zero reason to recruit this unit. Like, I get it. Flying range capability shouldn't be discounted, but the damage it's doing is pretty damn pathetic, I gotta say. You're much better off, seriously, you're much better off finding some faction of dwarves and allying them and getting allied recruitment for that. And given Cathay caravans, you might just encounter them along the way, just pointing that out with regards to that situation. Like, seriously, the most basic gyrocopter unit is worth 10 of these. Like, I'm not joking. Like, a single gyrocopter unit, maybe not 10, but at least 5 of these in terms of battle impact, undeniable. But then we have the flying Hellstorm rocket battery version. Absolutely inexpensive unit. Absolutely annoying to get. Expensive, hard to get, but this thing is insanely good. First off, it's not counted as a single entity, it's counted as an artillery. It's got flying Hellstorms. Now, why is that so damn important? Beyond the fact that, obviously, that ammo is limited, but you have also unlimited ammo in other ways. But the reason this is so important when we're talking about this is that, so Sky Lanterns, Sky Lanterns use this unit, Sky Junk's essential unit. To explain it, Hellstorms obviously are really powerful, and Fire Rain rockets are really powerful if they hit an aim. But there's plenty of terrain issues that can get in the way. It works, don't get me wrong, far more often than not. But at the same time, maybe I should put the drum in D tier, actually. But at the same time, with them, it's like, you know, you have to work for it, all that. You have to be careful about position. You have to be careful on hitting your own units. The moment you put Hellstorm rocket batteries on a flying unit is the moment that entire dynamic changes. It's far more accurate. One, it's far more accurate in field battles. Two, it's far better in sieges as well. It's going to handle almost every kind of battlefield that you'll encounter. And is just as good, or almost just as good, in terms of the damage dealing capability as the regular Fire Rain rockets. So that's one of the things to be said about Fire Rain rockets. Like, I would say that the one issue with these guys is that they're, you know, like Thunder Barges, Rogue Idols, they're annoying to recruit. But at the same time, right, the kind of capability they provide in an army is unmatched in a situation. Like, I will say this much about Thunder Barges in a Dwarf campaign. You look at Thunder Barges, you might think, oh, it's the ultimate single entity that can do a lot of damage. Do you know what else can do a lot of fucking damage from there? And that are far easier to recruit? Gyro Bombers. And in point of fact, Gyro Bombers are, generally speaking, a more effective unit than Thunder Barges. Because, yeah, Thunder Barges may have unlimited fucking ammo, but they're also slow and a big-ass target. They'll probably kill everything before they go down, but Gyro Bombers have an insane amount of single target damage, AoE damage, an significant amount of bombs, and that's without considering Malachi's upgrades, just pointing that out. So there's a lot of capability over there available with that unit, and that's a unit available again before Thunder Barges. Whereas with Sky Junks, there's no other unit that comes even close to the capability that Sky Junks offer for Cathay. Then we have Terracotta Sentinel. So if I were to change anything over here, what would I change? Well, I think I'm going to put Jade Lancers actually as a D tier unit. Like, in terms of, like, when I consider this versus the Drummer or the Moonbird, I think I actually have more reasons to recruit the Drummer or Moonbird. Also, yeah, I don't necessarily want to leave the Peasant Archers alone there in D tier, but to be fair, like, it's just genuinely the case of Jade Lancers. Just, like, when you think about these two flying units, if you're looking in terms of, like, flanking capability and all that, yeah, these two units are better. Then we have Terracotta Sentinels. So where do I stand on Terracotta Sentinels? In terms of combat capability, these things are S tier, easily. But they're also a very difficult to fucking acquire unit that is a bit redundant by the point you can get them. Because by the time you can get a single Terracotta Sentinel, you have single entities, flying single entities, ground-based single entities. Sure, the Terracotta Sentinel goes in duels against Rogue Idols and might flat out win. Maybe, maybe not. Can go either way. But at the same time, and it's really good against masses of infantry, but here's my issue with the Terracotta Sentinel. That tier requirement makes it so that by the time you can recruit it, it's meaningless. And the kind of capability it provides is not necessarily that important by the time you can get it. Like, that's the thing about Skyjunks, right? They might be a bitch to recruit, but they offer something very fucking tangible. Having a more powerful ground-based single entity unit when you've already got plenty of power on the land is a bit redundant. So while I do love the Terracotta Sentinel as a unit in itself, and it is a good single entity, I think CA really needs to understand that making a really powerful fucking single entity as tier 5 means we're not going to use it in a campaign. By the time we can use it, it's pretty damn redundant. So I think maybe they should allow us to recruit at least a couple. You know, I would love to recruit a couple of rogue idols if I'm not playing wars like this. A couple of thunder barges, just like without the exception, with the exception of Malachi's, you know, free ones. But I think it would be like nice to just like, okay, you can get one of these at say tier 3, or yeah, one at tier 3, 2 at tier 4, you know, per settlement, and you can get them from the main settlement building. And I would say this for like thunder barges and all that. Just get a couple of these, and then you can just flat out regularly recruit them if you get the settlement to tier 5. That would be a bit fun from my point of view. It might seem like, oh, you only get one per tier 3 settlement. Yeah, but consider this. It's much easier to get to, or tier 3 provincial capital. It's much easier to get to a tier 3 provincial capital than it is to, and it's easier to get like 10 of those than it is to get a single settlement to tier fucking 5. Just worth pointing out. Just worth saying that. So I think that would be a useful thing to have in a campaign, but as it currently stands, I'm not even going to put it in an A tier. Because like an A tier, like these units, you kind of want to, like S and A, you want to get them consistently. Whereas B is stuff that can be useful, but maybe, you know, not necessarily so. It's not essential. And that would be my perspective on the Cathay in a roster for Total War Warhammer 3. I know people will disagree with me on some of these things like the Terracotta Sentinel, but I don't care how powerful a unit is individually. I'm interested, like, is it worth recruiting? Do I need it? Skyjunks offer a capability that is extremely good. Terracotta Sentinels, kinda. That's all I had to say. Costin signing out.